Hello, everybody. I hope you can works right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Michaela Vančová. I am from Slovak Research Center. Slovak Research Center is a site network based in Slovakia, and we are conducting clinical trials in many different indications. We are working with more than 50 PIs, and we are currently having seven clinical trials at 12 sites open. I would like to provide you just a point of view from the clinical trial sites, how the situation with COVID-19 and all the limitations influence the clinical trials at our sites with our patients. So just to tell you the statistics, so only 9% of currently open clinical trials at our sites are continuing recruitment. Everything else was stopped. But when it comes to the on-site visits, we are still 50% of on-site visits, just 50% were switched to the phone contact or other type of visits. From other trial activities, like all monitors at our sites were stopped, and the pre-study visits and initiation visits were opened just this week. So this week we finally start new clinical trials with opening the new sites, and also with selecting our sites for different clinical trials. I would like to introduce the panel for today. Panel involves the different kinds of professionals, so that nobody is giving on the same thing. So I would like to introduce Garrett. Please go ahead, because I think it's easier if you introduce yours, what you can provide us information on, and what we can discuss with you.
Perfect. So good morning. My name is Gareth Powell. I work for the National Institute for Health Research in the UK. We're a government-funded organisation and one of the most integrated healthcare networks in the world. Part of my role is supporting the life sciences industry to set up and deliver their research in the UK. And the other side of that is actually working alongside the life sciences industry to involve in their clinical trial design. So the NIHR as a whole is I represent the Clinical Research Network. I should point out we're part of the NIHR. And as I say, our role is very much the research delivery side of the wider NIHR.
Okay, thank you very much. Nurcan, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Mihaela. My name is Nurcan Coşkun. I'm a professional, worked mainly in clinical trials in my career. Currently, I'm working as a collaborator with CERN. And before that, I was working in risk-based monitoring field at Medtronic, as well as dealing and managing monitoring teams. And I'm having my experience in top 100 companies like Pfizer, Medtronic, Merck, and Eli Lilly. And I worked more than 20 years with pharma and medtech companies, plus CROs, as well as in academia. And okay, I am working more on monitoring side of how COVID-19 impacted the clinical trials.
Okay, thank you very much. And last but not least, Matúš.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So my name is Matúš Hajduk. I work as a clinical operations lead at a company called HealthMode. Our company focuses on development of digital measures for clinical trials and for clinical practice and other aspects of digitalization of clinical trials. My role as a clinical operations lead is to to run the trials actually across both the US and Europe. And my background is in molecular biology and bioinformatics.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can start with Garrett. You are working with patients with different aspects. You are designing the clinical trials with them. You are meeting patients which are already involved in clinical trials. So could you please tell us what is the effect of the COVID epidemic on the collaboration with patients, like if there are any major changes in your collaboration, if it is more difficult to work with the patients, or how did it affect you?
I think it's created a new way of working. We're seeing quite a major culture change off the back of COVID-19. Obviously, a number of scale. Obviously, we're having a remote conference at the moment is part of this reason. So that uptake of using virtual and digital technology for communication practice has been brought into this way of working effectively. Part of this we're seeing is just the communication with people, with families, loved ones that actually wanted to communicate with one another. So that way of working is very much becoming an established route. Now, traditionally, I'm a big advocate of when we're involving patients in these discussions, whether that's with the life science industry or patient ambassadors or however that may be, it's very much the face-to-face discussions, because that can be a far more positive and opening experience. But obviously that's not an option currently. So we're trying to find new ways of working. So at the moment, that remote way of working, whether that's reviewing patient documentation or protocol designs, or having just that general insight discussions about what it's like to live with that condition and the impacts and the burdens of participation in trials exist and how we can manage that. And that does bring with it its own challenge. Obviously, when we're working with the life science industry, we're very keen on ensuring that documentation is signed, patient notification sheets. That kind of direct signature is much more difficult to achieve. We can't really be posting out documentation to individuals. So we're having to work a bit smarter, a bit more, pretty much as we work within organizations, and we're trying to using things like DocuSign and other kind of e-consent platform to try and work directly with those individuals. In the long term, I think this can have quite significant changes. Obviously, we're talking about virtual and hybrid and remote clinical trials. And if that's going to be the direction of travel, which I'm very sure it will be very rapidly, is how do we involve these patient voices in those clinical trial designs as well? And we're speaking about, well, we're moving to a more remote way of working. How could we adopt our practices with that as well? So I think that will be an interesting challenge. I think as a result of this, with that, say, I mentioned that culture change again, I think we'll be in a good position to enable that going forwards.
Yeah, definitely. And did it also affect the interest of the patients that, for example, when you were looking for the new patients who could be involved in the activities, that people were less interested or more interested, or what was the effect?
So with kind of patient advocacy and patient involvement, you do get different levels of interest. So a very kind of burdensome condition, certainly if we look at the rare disease at the moment, they are incredibly interested in working directly with the life sciences and academia to support the design of clinical trials. If it's a less intensive condition, so a light asthma, for example, or mild eczema, for example, you possibly won't have the same level of interest because the burden on those individuals isn't as high. When we're talking about a condition such as COVID-19, which ultimately is affecting everyone, obviously more vulnerable groups, we're seeing BME groups also kind of on that vulnerable risk. We're all effectively patient advocates now. We're all seeking that clinical trial, that treatment, or that vaccine being enabled. The media is very much behind this as well. So every day we're seeing updates about potential trials and these medications coming through. But suddenly you've got a whole population who are actually well informed, very interested in finding a resolution to this. So that engagement potentially could be very much increased. However, we're also seeing individuals saying, well, if I need to travel to a clinical site, for example, to have a injection or a vaccine or a pill as a treatment, for example, I don't necessarily want to do that because I'm putting myself at risk. So it's managing that balance between very cautious about going to clinical science, with the other half saying, well, we're very interested in this. So that's having an impact on clinical trials, as healthy volunteers can be, say, somewhat reluctant to participate. But at the same time, there's that drive where individuals want to participate as well.
Interesting. And regarding the co-trials, what's the design of the trials like? Are you having everything only virtual, or are you also using the on-site design for them?
So there's quite a big mix. We've had, due to the kind of rapidity of the setup and delivery of these trials, we haven't necessarily seen the same level of patient involvement as we potentially like. A lot of these are being conducted in critical care settings, for example. So it wouldn't necessarily be, not necessarily appropriate, but the speed of these required hasn't allowed for that. However, we're also seeing a number of online observational trials. The King's College London, for example, in the UK, they've extended an observational trial just come out of the Zoe Twins trial, for example. And this is tracking the symptoms of COVID-19. It's using e-consent and patient data sharing to enable this. And I think this is something we're going to see more of. But traditionally, we've always, with data sharing, it's been a bit of a challenge, as there's a lot of resistance to sharing data with third parties. With Amazon, newspapers, all this kind of Facebook, for example, we're very, very rapid and very keen to share our data, knowingly or otherwise, but we're very cautious when it comes to healthcare data. So the key to this, I always believe, is the information providing. You're explaining to individuals why this is important, how their data is going to be used, how it's going to be protected, and what are the effectively incentives for them to get to do this. And again, with that COVID-19, everyone's a patient advocate effectively. There's an interest, there's no risk associated with participating in that observational trial. So they've thankfully had a very high uptake for this. I think that's a good stepping stone for the future as well, for uptake of similar trials, as long as they adopt that same methodology of informing individuals about how that data is being used. And equally providing them with suitable opportunities to back out of that trial if they wish, to withdraw from that trial if they wish to, and how their data will be removed. So it's a good testing platform, I suppose, for use of the e-consent, data collection and data sharing as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We can move to the other point of this discussion. So we covered the patient interest in design, patient interest in clinical trials, and also the technologies which it brings and which we can now suddenly try even nobody wanted before to make it that quickly. So Nurkan, could you please provide us your point of view that how this situation affected the monitoring of clinical trials? What kind of changes were implemented, and what was changed? How the situation changed in the monitoring field?
Actually, monitoring field is already changing and going through lots of developments with the technology, bringing tools and utilizing a new way of conducting the trials. Of course, now, when the situation came in place, EMA and FDA, they also published some guidance for how to apply some of the different alternatives. Everything needs to be considered without giving any burden to the sites, and also staying in the laws and regulations which are already framed, and also respecting to data privacy, which is also came in place, especially for EMA with the GDPR. So with this, how it is really had impact, of course, there were some risk assessment, because risk-based monitoring in place that you should be really assessing the risk before moving forward. And this is also becoming part of the quality management of the clinical trials. So defining which studies are more in affected, and how you can really apply some alternative methods like remote source data verification or remote visits. And this should be really done with care to the sites as they were really put in the front line to really put their efforts for the COVID-19 efforts. So it was really had impact, like canceling or postponing the visits, extending time between the visits, and also trying like phone or website visits. And again, everything really needs to be agreed with the sites, and also checking the contracts, and if there are any information already available in the consent form that the data could be shared remotely. So these are the things that put in place in first round, and of course changes coming up.
Yeah, thank you. And what do you think? Will the trends after the COVID-19 be different than they were before? What would you expect? That how is the whole situation with the monitoring of clinical trials will change?
Yeah, I think the clinical trials already in a way to become more virtual, or the centralized trials that, there are so many initiatives and work is done by companies. And yeah, of course, it is going to give a momentum to, applying all these new technologies or new alternative methods to the clinical trials. However, again, there are still some differences between the regions. If we look at the US, it is much quickly deployed. However, if we come to EMEA region, the regulations are still keeping us not really immediately accessing the data or doing the remote visits. So these are all needs to be considered. However, this new way of working with the situation we are in, I think it will be an example for the regulatory bodies, and there will be some new guidance. I expect personally that there will be some new guidances will come up how to conduct monitoring.
Okay, thank you. And do you think that at the end it will be advantage or disadvantage for European countries? Because of course we all know that US is a little bit in front of us, like they have already implemented the many digital technologies before, and we are more or less the beginners. In some countries they are more experienced. For example, in our Eastern European region, we are completely just starting with this. So do you think it will be advantage that we will just quickly implement, or disadvantage that, for example, the sponsors wouldn't like to go to our countries with the new trials?
No, I don't think that there will be some limitation for going to other countries, because we still need to get more diversity when we are getting the population and understanding how the disease or the drugs are working for the patients. However, of course, it is more technology-related question that if it can be really applied in the countries, because we see that in some countries we are still using the paper documentation for the medical records of the patients. Maybe this is going to really push that there will be more digitalization coming for other part of the world as well, as much as they can afford. So this is also, now it is becoming more and more accessible and utilized, which can be an advantage that it applied. However, we should still think that the country, US is one country with the regulations applied, although, the size is big. But on the other hand, other countries they have different regulations, although EMEA is trying to get harmonized everything that apply in same sense. However, the regulations for the data privacy or patient rights might be slightly different. I think there will be more flexibility coming for our region as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So in general, would you say that the COVID-19 would mean the end of the classical on-site monitoring, or do really CRAs need to be afraid that they are not going to have the role of this?
No, I don't think that in short term there will be not a visit to the sites, because still as a sponsor you need to have the oversight what is happening at the site, and there will be visits happening. However, with risk-based monitoring, it was also still a case that you were going more to the risky sites than more the sites which were running well. Of course, you are visiting that sites as well, but maybe this is going to be making a little bit faster approach to reducing the number of visits. And technology is going to take place, and it will be applied to certain type of studies as well. And the long term, yeah, it might be the case, but I think it is not really close that on-site monitoring visits is going to the end.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we can move to you, Matuš, and where some people are afraid that they are not going to be needed anymore, as we were saying that's the case. I guess you guys who are working with the digital technologies and wearables, you are now the most popular ones, and you are the busiest one. So would you say that there was a huge increase in the interest in digital technologies and wearables?
Yes, we definitely can see an increase now that the pandemic started and the social distancing measures are being implemented. I think it has two levels in that. One is the trials that are targeting COVID-19 and as such, and those trials are utilizing the advantages that digital solutions can provide. That is the high real world evidence and more dense, more sensitive, more dense data, more sensitivity in the data. You also get more objective data, and potentially what we think you will also get faster and easier large scale deployment of the trial itself. So those are the things that are needed for COVID-19 trials, because the outbreak was sudden, it was huge. So you need to contain that sort of a new disease that we have. And also the second level, and that is the implementation of digital solutions for trials oriented at different indications than COVID. Obviously, as you mentioned, as Gareth mentioned, you have sponsors who are willing to conduct the trials still, although there is maybe some drop in the interest. You have sites that are still willing to conduct the visits, and also you have patients who are willing to stay in the trial and to enroll into the new trials. But there was also some survey that I think resulted with around 60 to 70% of the patients, they were still interested in enrolling into the new trials. And especially in trials with vulnerable populations, with older people, like dementia trials, diabetes trials, you need to keep this going, and you need to figure out how do you keep them going when you can't have patients coming to site as often or at all if possible. So that's the second push we're seeing, that sponsors of such trials are now interested in in having the visits conducted remotely, having their outcomes digitalized, so that the patients can have their status measured at home without going to the site, without using public transportation, and without exposing themselves to risk.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. And when you compare it, what were the most wanted wearables and technologies for the COVID trials, and what were the most wanted wearables and technologies for the other different trials?
So obviously, those related to COVID follow the symptoms of the COVID-19 disease. So even our company is running digital trial for cough monitoring. So that is a big interest. You have also other proposals for temperature monitoring for just simple symptom tracker, and then the others that depends on the kind of indication you have. So basically, the wearables are very well suited for things like gait, so neuromuscular diseases, for cognitive status measurement, for activity measurement, performance status.
Yeah. And how do you see it from the point of view of regulatory authorities and acceptance of these wearables and digital technologies? Because as we know that the beginnings to implement this as they are new, it's a little bit difficult. So do you think that this situation made it a little bit faster, or does it make regulatory authority a little bit more willing to use these technologies and to agree with using them, or how do you see this?
Yes, so the authorities and mostly FDA, they were already welcoming the digital technologies even before the COVID-19, and they were becoming more open to that. Now, the pandemics definitely accelerated that. Both FDA and EMA had their guidance issued where they suggest telemedicine digital measure as one of the approaches to be considered when it comes to dealing with the disease. FDA even waived some of the medical devices, software as a medical devices classes, especially those intended, I think that was cognitive behavioral therapy and others, where they lowered their expectations of what needs to be done to have them used. So they are emphasizing that definitely.
Yeah. So I think that's a good thing for all of us. And one more question. Were you also implementing new technologies in the already running trials that, for example, sponsor approach you that they would need to change something? So were you helping them with running trials to change something, to implement something new?
Yes, there have been requests like that. Not sure I can disclose them in detail, but yes. If a sponsor is found in a situation that they have a big pivotal efficacy trial running, and they're just approaching this end of the treatment visits for their critical efficacy data, and if that was measured during an on-site visit, and now the on-site visits are not possible or should be delayed, they are trying to figure out solution that they could still get the data, that they could still save their expensive trial, and that is also putting pressure on us to be able to provide those solutions quickly, and most importantly, to have them validated in a satisfactory extent.
Yeah. Thank you. I forgot to mention the patient point of view at the beginning when I was telling you that our statistics are that, just like the biggest number of trials stopped recruitment, little bit less trials stopped the on-site visits. But when you take it from the patient point of view, we have at least, I would guess, like 90% of patients who, when they were contacted, they were still willing to come to the on-site visits, because you can see that when patients already started the trial, they are really interested. So I think this can also impact the implementation of the new technologies, that the sponsors do not need to worry if the patients would accept, because I think that if you offer them even in the middle of the trial new technologies, so they would happily take it and they would continue. At least this is our experience, that we haven't experienced any kind of consent withdrawal or dropouts since the situation started. So I think that the patients are really compliant and they are really responsible when it comes to their involvement in the clinical trials. Do you have anything else you would like to add on this, or can we start with the questions from the audience?
I think I've got one small thing to add to that, and that's where you talk about compliance when you're introducing new technologies into the clinical trial. And that should be the case where we're implementing technology which makes it easier for those participants to continue to participate in that clinical trial. And part of the reason we're seeing the move towards remote hybrid clinical trials, for example, is to try and address that idea of not just compliance, but retention in clinical trials as well. So ultimately, we want to try and make it easier, more accessible for individuals to participate. We recognise, obviously, core areas which are often cited as being challenges is the number of visits, the length of the visits, and sometimes the difficulties of that as well. Certainly for people in quite challenging conditions to live with, for example. So that panacea, not just enroll in the first place, but actually to continue to participate in that trial, especially in these kind of challenging environments at the moment as well.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Just maybe one point, as Norkan had mentioned about the differences, regional differences, and the difficulty of implementing a virtual trial sometimes, that I think it would be very welcome to have within the European Union a standardized approach to e-consent, because currently it differs from country to country. Some countries are more ready for that, some are not at all. And that would be very welcome to see maybe EMA to do a step in, so that we could be more competitive when compared to the US.
Oh yes, I fully agree with this, and I think Western European region, we would appreciate it the most, because you know, the other countries, they already can take something out of their experience. And for example, with e-consent, we are not that experienced, so it would help us all and it would be really welcome.
Yeah, yes. It's very fragmented at this moment.
Yeah, I can just add for the wet signature, you know, making difficulty that in EMEA, still the regulatory bodies are asking for the wet signature. So I agree that there will be some changes to this approach as well.
One more thing I just thought about based on my experience this week. As I said at the beginning, this week we already had some pre-study visits and initiation visits that the companies already allowed the CRAs to continue with the activities. So I have to say that I have never seen as happy CRAs as this week. They were so happy to come to the site, to meet the people, to do the pre-study visit, to do the initiation visit, that, you know, maybe it has also this positive impact that people are appreciating their work. They are not as tired as they were before from, you know, they were tired of so many on-site visits and traveling from one place to another place. And right now, everyone is happy to go anywhere he is asked to, and the visits are real pleasure. So at least this is our experience. So I think that we can start with the questions. I have a question for you, Garrett. Do you see some early adopters and some maybe more reluctant companies not so open to adopting virtual clinical trials?
I haven't seen reluctance per se. Certainly we have seen companies which are perhaps ahead of the curve. Personally speaking, I do see the kind of movement towards virtual, remote and hybrid clinical trials as a bit of an extension of the patient centricity movement we saw in the last 10 years or so. And in this instance as well, we're seeing that some companies have adopted this much more than others. And those are the ones which are tending to lead in that movement or that direction of travel with regards to remote clinical trials. So Janssen, for example, are very far ahead of the curve with this. We're seeing organisations such as Leo Pharma, a slightly more mid-sized company, and Paraxels, a CRO, who are also adopting this methodology. And I think there are a number of other companies moving with travel. Some of the earlier phase companies potentially won't be moving as rapidly as some others, simply because it's not necessarily appropriate for them at that time. But if I can quote Lo de Wolf, who's Servier's lead patient officer, who said effectively you have to adapt to survive from a company's perspective, he was talking about, again, patient involvement, patient engagement. But I think the same will be equally true as we move towards this more hybridized way of working in the future.
I can also add that, sorry, yeah. I think it is really the trend, and if we look at the risk-based monitoring, I mean, the first draft guideline came in 2011, and 2013 the final one. And still we see that even the risk-based monitoring, which has quite an impact on the clinical trial costs and, how you can do the checking the data. These are all still companies reluctant to apply. But I see that now the regulatory bodies allowing the, doing remote source data verification, centralized monitoring or centralized data review. These are also moving faster than so far. I mean, if we look at it, took 7 years for some companies really establishing it, and some of them are still not embedding in their system. So I think this outbreak is really going to make differences how the trials are conducted and how sites, sponsors, and regulatory bodies make a different approach to the conduct of the clinical trials.
Definitely. I think we're also seeing a number of vendors starting to specialize in this area as well. Yeah. And certainly with what we may end up seeing is a number of companies doing everything in-house, and we've got several different ways of working. Potentially, I'm not saying it is the correct response, but there may be better to kind of go forward. We have specialised vendors who are enabling these organisations to adopt this method of working, doing it well and right for patient benefit. And just, you mentioned about regulators as well. We know technology is outstripping the regulators in speed effectively. But certainly from a UK perspective, I know the regulators are very keen to adopt this model, and they're trying to work together in collaboration to catch up and ensure that this innovation can continue and isn't being held back effectively.
Yes. So, do you think that we will see some differentiation in the pharmaceutical space because of this adopting virtual clinical trials, because of adopting wearables and digital technologies? Anyone?
No, I think it is already making a differentiation for the companies that they will also start thinking differently, because again it was that with the strict regulations, they were going even beyond what was expected from them. But now it is going to get in, and then applying the technologies, new way of doing trials. Plus, it is also going to have an impact on the drug development. I mean, we are really seeing that now. There is also the trend with the AI, machine learning, these are big data. These are all already bringing differentiation for the pharmaceutical companies, and now it is going to take maybe even more speed than what it was expected.
Definitely, I agree. I think it's inevitable that we will see more and more changes in addition to ones we're already seeing. And at the moment with COVID-19, we're seeing more and more collaboration between the life science industry, academia, cross-country working, healthcare spending, for example, or an investment in R&D. If this continues, we continue to collaborate, we'll be able to establish these technologies far faster than we were previously. So hopefully that trend will continue.
To add on this, from a clinical trial site point of view, I can just say that maybe this will be the breaking point in the site selection, because as you know, that it's really, really difficult to be the site of selection. Even you have experience, even you have the patients. So it's not always easy to be selected in the particular trial, because there are opinion leaders, there are still the sites that have been there for the last 20, 25 years. So hopefully this will be the breaking point, and the more professional sites, the young investigators, the PIs, the people who are open to technologies, who are willing to invest in the education, who are willing to learn new things, that they will finally receive a green light and be selected. And the old-fashioned sites, which have been there in the unchanged conditions for many years, they will finally start to disappear. So might happen. One more question from the audience. How can you clinical trial costs with the use of technology? Maybe Matusz as an expert.
Yeah. So usually the on-site visits are the largest part of the budget in any clinical trial. So if you reduce these, you already cut costs. The second aspect is that potentially with digital technology, the patients, they get to carry the device with themselves, and they are monitored continuously. So you get much richer data, and then you should be in a position to spot the difference between treated and untreated, or between your medication and the comparator much sooner, or with much smaller sample size, just because of the richness of the data you have. So that would be another aspect of lowering the cost. And also, if you have good infrastructure for digital solution in place, you cut a lot of manual labor and manual processing of the data and data capture and data verification. So that's another layer on top of that could also bring the cost of the trial down.
Yeah, thank you. One more question. Do you think that the outcomes of the trials that are now conducted remotely will be significantly impacted? So,
yeah, if I take this one, I think there will be some impact because now there will be seen more protocol deviations and how you can get the adverse events reported, and you are not going to collect all the data, and I think it is going to have impact on the study reports, how it is really going to be done, and what areas are taking into account. And I think the sponsors are going to be more focused on the critical data that is really having impact, which this will also have impact on some studies being on hold, suspended, and or some data collected from some sites but not from all. So definitely there will be seen some impact on the trials.
Okay, thank you. Matusz, maybe one more for you. What technology is being used at sites now that were not used before the outbreak of COVID-19?
I don't think that the technology per se has changed. It's the extent of the adaptation of the technology. So when we were using wearables, Apple Watch, iPhones, smart rings before, those are still being used now, or iPads, whatever. It's that the extent of to which this technology is used that's really changing now. So this is becoming more broadly adopted. But the underlying technology as such, I don't think it's changing just because of the COVID-19.
No, I agree. It's definitely about the uptake of the available technology. So in the UK, if we look at Babylon Healthcare, we're using GP at hand in London, starting to expand across the rest of the UK. That the uptake of telemedicine was starting to kind of pick up in certain areas, but wasn't generally used outside of those kind of core regions. Medicine in primary care pretty much across the UK, and part of that is necessity. And I think as that adoption is seen to be easier, both potentially by sites and by patient participants or patients themselves, then we'll continue to utilise that as a standard way of working.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more to add? Or can we continue with another question? There is one more. What about source data verification, Nurken? That's a question for you.
Yeah.
That
actually,
did this source data verification? Is it the end of this procedure, or?
No, I don't think that it is going to end. It is just how it is done with the circumstances the sites are in. It is going to be done differently. I mean, at the moment, it could be also done by WebEx, that the site can show if they are available, for such a process. And it is all that source data verification is going to be postponed, but the data review is going to be done centrally. So it is not the end of the source data verification. However, the focus is going to be more on the critical data. This is also what risk-based monitoring is bringing. You identify the risk for the study at the beginning, and then you're identifying the critical data points that you should really focus on. And of course, you get the some examples from the other data types that you really see that the sites are collecting all necessary information for the study. But it is that source data verification will continue, but in a reduced manner, and also with the focus on more to the critical data points.
Yes. Thank you. I just thought about one more question, which is actually to all of you. When you were talking about the data and data points, do you think that implementing the new technologies, using the wearables, doing the remote monitoring, doing the centralized monitoring, how do you think will affect this, the identification of fraud or misconduct? Do you think it's gonna be like it's like two sides? That do you think it's gonna be easier for the investigators and the sites to do any kind of fraud or misconduct, or do you think that implementation of all of these technologies is also helping to eliminate as much fraud and misconduct as possible?
Yeah, actually, this is the reason why the risk-based monitoring came in place, that, because you are really seeing the trending and also what are the outliers, what is happening at the site. And actually, with the tools that now develop for centralized monitoring, you can easily identify some differently. It could be that there are some mistakes, but you can also identify the frauds with these new methodologies, as well as the systems that you will use. So it is it is going to help us to identify frauds much easier than before.
Okay, thank you. What about you, Matus? What do you think that, is it easy to cheat wearables?
If you really want to, but why would you then? That's a good question, and actually I think it would be worth doing some research into the data integrity with these, and comparing the data integrity of the typical on-site trial and decentralized trials. We would really need to see some data on that. You know, it's just opinions until that point.
Yeah, that would be interesting. What about you, Garrett? What do you think?
I mean, hopefully you'll be able to identify these as outliers, and it'll be more obvious that the data is being manipulated. But as I say, without kind of hard evidence at the moment, it's an interesting question, but I wouldn't necessarily have one qualified to answer at the moment.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I think these were all of the questions that came from the audience. So if you don't have any more comments or questions, I think we could wrap up. Thank you very much to all of you. It was a really interesting discussion, and I think that with all of this experience and information, we will be pretty strong for the next couple of months, which will come after all of this, and we will have definitely more knowledge for the upcoming clinical trials, which will just start, and maybe we will be better in planning and making any kind of risk assessment.
Yeah, no, it is great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Stay safe. Bye.